Yesterday you saw mostly photography from artists. Today I show you quite a bit of also design, because as an artist I'm mainly interested in generating the content of my photographs myself, not really to document pre-existing reality. I'd like to quote the American photographer Dwayne Michaels, who said, "Photography reinforces our idea of reality, and you can do things with a camera that contradicts our understanding of reality." But I'm also a graphic designer and who loves typography, and I like the values or questions that the use of specific typefaces may evoke. In Sweden, in 1986, I shot this photo. This was what was said at the time. It was quite a debate in Sweden at the time, in the 80s, between documentary photography and what the documentary photographers called subjective photography. And to me, this was documentary, but documentary photography most often was, factory photos or war scenes, and definitely not constructed still lives, as I was doing. But it happened to be that the weekend after the nuclear accident at Chernobyl, we arrived at our country house and found this bat laying in the stairway up to the attic. And I thought it was too much a coincidence. So I called this image the leak. The advantage, I think, of being a graphic designer and a photographer is, and I will show you some examples of that. We'll talk about not only my specific photographs, but also other photographers' photographs that I've been using. And for example, in this book, which is a book I did for the American artist Ann Hamilton, it was quite a debate, I would say, between the publisher and me and some other people about this cover. And when the publisher said, well, it's going to be also be viewed on a screen in a stamp size, and you can hardly see what it says. You can't read it, and the image is very small. But it showed out, and Anne and I were quite consistent about the power of also a small image, even though readability is an issue, of course. Both Anne and I, and in particular Anne, is also very keen on the tactility of the book. I'll come back about that, but I'll show you another example from this book. Also is not pro-readability, so to speak, because this book has 15 pages that are like chapter dividers, where the text is only embossed, no color. It's embossed on a dark blue paper. You can touch it, it's beautiful, but you may have to, lean the book a bit to get the light right to really be readable. This was the index page, by the way. But as I'm photographing myself, I also have respect of other photographers, of course. And I think knowing that they also respect me as a designer because they know I will not mistreat their imagery. It's easy, makes the communication easy. This case, which was an anniversary when the Oriforce glass works factory, when they became 100 years old, I designed these a set of 2 books. And you should have a look at the Oriforce factory. They had a photographer themselves, whose name was John Selby. And John Selby was a magnificent photographer. He did super good photographs. And some of those are shown here. He also did actually the advertisements and with very experimental use of his own photography. I would say, in a way, in the manner of Sutnar. But doing that, this book, there was a big archive of photographs, and it had lots of images of good quality, but I thought lots of them had been published a lot and seen, and I wanted to make the reader look at glass in a different way. So I commissioned 2 other photographers to do some new works. And one of them, Denise Grünstein, she did environmental images, like these first ones. And Vince Reichert, who's a Swede, he was asked to try to experiment with the glass and do whatever you'd like just to make people interested in the glass as such, to make people look at glass in a way that you haven't seen glass earlier. And well, this was just to show, like structure of headlines and things. I did a magazine which was called Forum for Design and Architecture. It was a quarterly publication. Did that for some years, worked with lots of photographers. And I'm keen on, if I make something that is a repeated thing, of course, like a magazine, and also to stick to a way of editing and using photography. These are some different covers. And the typefaces, I only used 2 typefaces, but kept on varying the use of that in different ways. The top one is about the new opera house. The thing with magazines is that you can be, they don't last for that long, and you can be quite playful and you can try out things which you may not do in a book. But you always, with a magazine, you work with a grid, like you vary your design in just a few ways. So, and the top one is from I don't remember now. It's the place in Arizona, Nevada. And the bottom one, more precise, is from Gothenburg, and when they placed the Hasselblad Center at the bottom of this museum. I think with maybe I'm just too obvious here, but I think when you work, I know if there are any designers to be in the audience, but you, as a photographer, if you edit your own work, I'm always using a few kind of simple composition rules, so to speak. If you are dealing with something that opens up I think it should, a composition should kind of follow, you know, if you open a book, you have an angle, and to make, for example, at the top, that's a typical right-hand photo, the way it's composed. And the one on top to the left is a typical, to me, left-hand, left page photograph because of the way where the light comes from. Because the light is coming from the left, from outside of the book, and I think it's logical when you open a book or a magazine that the darkest part is in the middle, where it's often actually is darker also when you view a picture book. I work with large photographs, but also very small photographs, and this was a series of Swedish photographers as stamps. When you make an edition of stamps, it could be only one, but it could only be 5, as in this case. And I couldn't select the photographers myself, even though I mean, I could have, but it was a political issue as well, so it was a reference group that did proposals for who should be shown on a stamp. And when that had been decided, then I could, you know, select or propose the specific images. And of course, it's even though each stamp also should work individually, I also wanted the 5 to work together when they are bought like that, if they are bought like that as a 5 set. So it's some decisions about, you know, that it has a gender mix, a style mix, and a kind of a readability, because making a stamp, you would think it's really easy, it's so small, but it's actually harder, I would say, than to make a poster, because it has other requirements on readability, so to speak. I don't mean the text now, but also the text, but an image. And a stamp ability, I would say, because when post offices stamp a stamp, it can't be a black stamp, because then it doesn't show up, you know, the dates and things. There has to be areas in a stamp where it shows dates and things. I was an exterior board member of the Swedish mail stamp department for about 10 years, and looked at all the stamps that were being published. I want to show you an interesting cover, I think, not made by me, made by an Austrian designer named Stefan Sagmeister. It's the book, the title of the book is Made You Look. When you pull the book out of that transparent plastic case, this is what you see. It's quite effective, playing with just the colors. It does make you look, doesn't it? I do quite a lot of books, and I would say most books do in one way or another make you look, but of course it's dependent on the editing, for example, and the quality of the photographs. There is, if you ever go to Sweden, I suggest that you stop at the southern part of Sweden at something called Vanås Art Park. It's W-A-N-O, an A with a ring, Vanås Art Park. It's been there now for about 30 years, but it's from the beginning, it's on the placement On the site there is a castle from the 1400s, which is a private castle, and it's surrounded by a beautiful park. And in the park, it's also an art installation, which has grown quite a lot during these years. And some years ago, Louise Bourgeois' Mama, which is the name of that big spider that you might have seen elsewhere, because I think there are five copies of it, and they are placed at, they have a permanent position at some places, art spaces around the world. This one is the one that is also traveling, so to speak. It was placed in the park. You can see the castle in the background there. But it stayed for close to a year. So, and I actually asked the local photographer who was doing lots of photography there to shoot it at all different kinds of weather conditions. In the winter like this, or in the summer, and the sequence of photographs in the end of the book, this is one of the last images. I said, why don't you go there, you know, late one afternoon, and just stay and keep photographing it until you barely can see it. This is one of my own. It's I don't that often use a title, but this is called Score, and it's from a series of photographs called Requiem. It was this is an old series, and made during a time that was very traumatic in Sweden. It's in the mid 80s, or around 86 and onwards. Our Prime Minister, Olof Palme, was murdered, and we had, as I said, that you saw in the beginning, that radioactive fallout from Chernobyl. So, and that, of course, that influenced that series. This one is called Ararat, the mountain, the Bible. It's like 12 by 16 centimeter view camera, contact prints. I see my photographs as objects, and also I think the framing is important, and I usually design the frame myself and find a carpenter to make them for me. These ones were very simple, but and I painted them. I don't like the frames to be, like the ones I'm showing here now. I want to send them and have them, randomly framed. I think maybe the framing, or the importance that I see to framing is has something to do with me also as a designer. I mean, it's kind of like it's not a book cover. Just as a book cover is not the content of a book. The frame is not a series of photographs, but it is what you see, or that holds, or can, it's kind of like the package for the photographs. Lots of decisions to decide, if you make a book, photographs or something else, you can base your format on all kinds of different things. On a concept, economy, it's easier to make it's cheaper to make a small book. But you can also, it could be a matter of status. When I did a book about this Requiem series that were, 12 by 16 centimeter contact prints. Those gave the format of the book, and they are printed like 1-to-1 scale. And of course, it was also an economic thing. But I wanted, with a small size, so you get a kind of intimacy. Almost like a small book, you also look at a bit closer. Mr. Strömholm, who is, or even though he's been dead now for quite some time, is most likely one of Sweden's most well-known photographers. And I think he's shown around the world more now than when he actually was living. One of his sons, who is a photographer himself, is running the estate of Christer Strömholm. And I knew him a bit, and I know when he wanted to do this book, which was the last one he did when he was alive, he went around to different, to furniture stores, and he measured the shelves, the height of the shelves, and he said, my book's going to be, this much, a couple of centimeters higher than all the shelves. I don't want people to put it in the shelf. It should be placed on the table. But if a book like this one that was made for the Modern Museum, for the Swedish sculptor Lars Englund, who is now in his 80s, this was done to a retrospective show at Moderna Museet in Stockholm. Lars, from the beginning, he said, I want a thick book. It should be, at least 450 pages. And that's what the museum calculated for. But it turned out to be 772 pages. And I think he actually cashed in a bit himself to get it that thick. But I think if you are making a thick book, and something that often when you look at books is overseen, I think to look at the cut, the bottom part here, the cut of the book. Here's a second edition of the book. It has a format which, I don't know if you have it here, but it's called G5. It's like a 17 by 24 centimeters, approximately. And so if you're gonna try to get an economy on a book with this amount of pages, you have to keep it down. If you keep it down to this size, you can get 32 pages out of one printing sheet. That is about like 70 by 100 centimeters, which keeps the economy down a lot. And this is special because it has, I wanted also to make the cut interesting, so that you can see if you hold the book that, and it's made, often they're in plastic in stores and in shops. If you looked at it, you said, well, there's a lot happening here. It contains a lot of different things. And it does, so it's like 24 changes of signatures. A signature, do you know what a signature is? It's like a printed sheet folded together into 32 pages. That's a signature. If it's a larger book, well, it's each sheet that is put together. And so I changed paper lots of times to get an effect. But it was kind of complicated because Lars, whom I didn't know earlier, he had a very preconceived idea about a photographer with mostly a pain in the ass, and did it all wrong. So we had lots of conversations. Here we were standing I'm living in an old school building, so this is my studio. And in order to move this forward, he had his sketches of his editing, and I had mine, and we put them out on tables, and then we discussed, you know, each other ideas. And he hated this cover because the cover of this is very special. It's I forgot to say that, but the sculpture he wanted to use on I2 is from the 60s, one of his early works, and they're made in rubber. So I used something called foam board, which is it's like a paper board that has a layer of foam actually, so it's a bit soft when you touch it. And he hated that at that time. But by using different color, the color paper, it's all chronological, the sequencing of his work from his earliest works and onwards. In some cases it was a glossy paper, other cases it was a matte paper, and in some cases he wanted to show his sketches, so it's like over 200 pages of from his sketchbooks, which I first was a bit hesitant on, but actually it's also the entire sketchbook, so you can follow some of his ideas about the sculpture, how it develops, because the sketches are getting more and more into detail as you page it, down to, he has a way of building sculptures with, down to small metallic parts sometimes that you can build them. Book design has lots, as typography you may know, has lots of rules and do's and don'ts. And this is quite unusual that the title page in this book is on page 705. And it's all images before that. And then it's followed with only 64 text pages, that's all. Then it's all images. Some, you know, sketches, of course. And the ending is chronology, so where it starts with a photograph of him at that age, in his about 80, and it ends with a photograph where he's a kid and standing outside of a museum in Stockholm. One of my series of photographs is a bit more sculptural than others, so that's why I put it here. I moved to the countryside southwest of Stockholm about 30 years ago. And actually, as you know, lots of things have been happening in farming and nature these last decades. And it influenced me to do a series, to start a series of photographs named, I call it Land. Particularly land in a way, because land in Swedish is also like countryside, but land is also country and possibly, you know, earth. It's kind of a bit of a memorial of countryside now lost. When we moved there, you could go to the neighbor and buy milk, you know, bring a bottle or a bucket or whatever. You can't any longer. These are 8x10 silver gelatin contact prints. It has become quite a large series. And the frames here are conceptual in a way, because they are rough hewn, you know, not smooth wood, but rough, sticky. And they are painted with something called falu red, And follow red is a very particular pigment color that you paint barns with in the countryside in Sweden. If you go, Thomas, when you went through Sweden, you most likely saw red barns all over the place. But funny, I was a bit surprised myself. I thought maybe this is kitschy, but as a frame, they look quite beautiful, or more elegant than like a barn, a piece of a barn. For a while, a year and a half or so, I was professoring in Gothenburg, and at that time, the Hasselblad Center, the Hasselblad factory was situated in Gothenburg, and the Hasselblad Center, which is a gallery, they had a British director at the time, Val Williams, who was very interesting. She showed a type of photography that I think never had been shown at the Hasselblad Center before. And I was asked because she had an idea, she wanted to do something, a kind of free handout or send-out piece that she wanted to do for each exhibition. And it got to be something that we called a newsletter. It's, you see here, where the number is, the first one and the 17th, I made 17 of them. That's the cover of the newsletter. And if you get it by mail, then you just tear that away, and you have the 16 pages underneath it. And again, this is what you could get out, the maximum size that you could get out of a 72 by 102 centimeter printing sheet. And she was interested in this, of course, because then she would know that every sender would cost this much to produce, and my fee was fixed. And also I tried to simplify it. I only used one typeface in the entire thing that I varied in different ways depending on the content. Unfortunately, she just stayed for a couple of years, and then the next director didn't continue with these. Together with a friend, I did a series of posters for a printing company. It was like a promotional poster, and the concept was to show portrait photography by world-famous photographers. The first one was by Joel Meyerowitz, one of his redheads, if you've seen that series. And the second one was by Richard Avedon. It was John Ford, the director, John Ford. These were 70 by 100 centimeter posters, and they were kind of given out or sent out flat. The industrialist Alfred Krupp was photographed by Arnold Newman. I met Newman, and because when I sent him, I mean, this was done, before internet. So I sent him a letter, and had a proposal of which photo to use. And then I met him in New York, and we discussed it. I think I proposed a mural portrait. Also, it was a very nice place. I really would like to publish a portrait of Krupp. It was a Time magazine commission that he did in 1966, and it was never published because the Time magazine people, they thought it was too controversial and they didn't dare to publish it. He had some that was not an exposure like this. This is an exposure he did when nobody else was in the room. He did some more traditional ones. But when he was moving his lights, he noticed, and Kurt was waiting for him, he noticed that, gosh darn, he looks like a devil, you know, when the lights are badly lit like this from two sides. And he shot a number of exposures and then quickly changed the light again until, you know, people came in to see. And so he showed other photographs that, I mean, because Arno Newman, as a Jew himself, he didn't want to depict truth in a specifically, you know, handsome way. Anyhow, so Arnold was happy when we made a poster of this one. We also did Robert Mapplethorpe, Frederick Sommer, I don't know if you know about him. He's dead now, as Robert Mapplethorpe, Christer Strömholm, Arthur Tress, Louis Hine, Wayne Michaels. There were very few that said no when we asked. I mean, this was a tiny printing company in Sweden, not known outside of Sweden at all, but I think they kind of liked the ambition. Anna Leibovich was asked, but she turned it down, as was, I contacted Dune Airbus, the daughter of Diane Airbus, but she wasn't interested either, unfortunately, because not particularly many women in the crowd. I'm interested myself in, you know, what also, you know, the face, so to speak, and I thought, you know, everybody knows about, you know, a bank robber pulling a stocking over his or her head, and how it really changes the look of somebody and to a very, you know, scary look. I thought, you know, what would happen if you paint something onto that, you know, scary look? How does that change the narrative of the photograph, and which I think is interesting, and I think it's interesting to do in somewhat abstract way to note the photograph with a kind of a narrative. That the funny thing also with photographs that, even though it's not, you know, historical or showing a historical site or anything, it's really dependent on time. When I did this some time ago, the clown or the joker, if you're talking about it today, has a totally different connotation than it did at that time, which is interesting. These are about 40 by 50 centimeters. I like to challenge the viewer in a sense, especially, you know, people looking at photographs who always, or not always, but often ask, you know, what is it? And I kind of like to challenge that, and so when they think, you know, what is it I'm looking at actually? The author Siri Hustvedt has formulated this brilliantly, I think, when she writes, doubt is a catalyst for close attention. Doubt is a catalyst for close attention. generally, I think one could, of course, say that a photograph recalls an image of a thing or a place or a person. But I wonder, and I started to wonder when I did this, but could it not also represent an absence of the same? An absence of a thing or a place or a person? I had found out, because I had been using an etched or sandblasted glass in parts in a different series, but I found out that if you place a photograph behind a sandblasted glass, it's how you read the image is dependent on the distance the viewer is, the distance of the viewer to the photograph. And it's actually, these are impossible to reproduce in a way. I'll show you. Usually with art or photograph, you walk up to something to see it closer if you want to see the details. This is the totally opposite. You walk up to it and you see the word. You don't see it at all because it's all just fades out. And I call it memorial. It's to be shown with a related series of smaller boxes, as you can see to the left there. Smaller oak boxes. It's called that series is called Oblivion, like oblivion or forgetfulness. In that series, Oblivion series, the photographs are similar. But in a similar way, it is difficult to discern and to see, which interests me, that actually people see different things. And it works, if you get close, you don't see it at all. But these smaller boxes are related to the portrait, so to speak, of the large one is 100 by 130 centimeters. Gunnar Smoljanski, I don't know if you've heard about him. He's one of the masters of Swedish photography, I would say. This was a poster I did a long time ago. He did a series called Promenadbilder. It means approximately stroll images, and they are small 6 by 9 centimeter contact prints. Unfortunately, he's now very sick from cancer and dying. I visited him just a few days ago, and he was really bad. I participated in I was a member of something called Dog Publishing. Dog Publishing was initiated or started by Gunnar Smoljanski, who's on the very left there. Also then it was Gunnar and David, who is, some of you might have seen his well, to the right of that pillar-like shape. And then it was Åke Ersson Lindman, who shoots mostly architecture, myself and Bruno Esch, who does all kinds of private works as well as projects for around the world and for books. We had a small space in the basement next to Gunnars, the Smoljanski's dark room in Stockholm. We did books and we did some postcards and we did small traveling exhibitions. One of the traveling exhibitions we did was called 22 Swedish Photographers Self-Portraits. And this is Self-Portrait with Elephant, India, 1985. Was mine. You see the elephant? The elephant tusk is at my mouth. Another Siri Hustvedt that I mentioned earlier, she also wrote in the same essay, I believe, expectation prevents discovery. Which I also think is a brilliant formulation. Expectation prevents discovery. And this is from a series called Anatome, or Anatome. It's a series of also 8 by 10 inch silver gelatin prints. It's collages that are made made and placed on a repro camera screen. Some of you might know what it was. Before the computers, you used a large repro camera if you wanted to do a paste up of a page or a book or whatever. I photographed the collages and then I destroyed them. And I've always been fascinated by anatomical drawings and things. And this one is called Amazing Gaze. And that I call this, the book, which was published about a year ago, in December 17, at the break 18. It's an intentional reference to literature, they call it, and other photographs, because I think it's interesting to create a kind of a narrative in photography that is not, that is a constructed photograph or constructed image. The book is there. Following that series, that Anatome series, which they're not very big, but I made it quite complicated the way I framed them in different ways. I was interested in doing something that was more uncontrollable and that, I didn't place everything myself or directed everything myself. So this is a series called Atlas, and it's actually earthworms crawling around on a drawing, spiral drawing. I was living at the countryside. It was easy to find them in the among the potatoes. I had a clear idea what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to do something where each individual image was not important, but the series of images was important. were to be seen as a series. And but I couldn't get the right expression, the right tonality of them in the dark room, in the analog dark room. So eventually, and this again, when I spent time in Gothenburg, I met a guy at an art school in Gothenburg who was the head of the printmaking department. And I told him, what if could you try to do a photopolymer gravure out of one of these? It was 9 by 10 centimeter negatives. And he did. And they weren't easy because by some reason to make a photogravure with not that much ink is more difficult than to make it with lots of ink. But it was interesting because it was also a way of getting, mixing the color and get a bluish greenish tone that I wanted to have. So they are eventually, he made 16 out of a whole, lots and lots of negatives that I had. But it took a long time. And again, I was interested in, the impression that, which often happens if some people see this, what is it, and most often they think, is it an ink drawing or that it is a photograph? They don't see. And my intention from the beginning was also to make a series where it should be shown not as individual images, but actually hung like this in levels, and to see movements that perhaps occur in between the images. And Hamilton, that I mentioned earlier, I've been working on and off with her lots of times, and she was invited to do an installation at the Swedish History Museum some years ago. And Hamilton has a background in textile, so she found this machine-like thing is a wind machine. This is a copy of a wind machine found at an old theater outside of Stockholm. So she had a carpenter make 6 or 8 copies of this wind machine, made different cloths, and they were tied to these wind machines. And she also had a studio in Stockholm to make like a costume, and they were hanging on racks in this hall. If you wanted, as a visitor, you could create your own sound performance by borrowing a suit, get your friends at each machine, and by winding it, they all had a different sound, different. It was storm on some, and some were very loud, and some were more like, I was involved because she also wanted to make a small book. I should show it to you, because here in the museum, you see in the back is altar pieces from different churches, and Anne, who I would think would be interesting to have here someday, because she has an interesting approach to photography. And here she moved around with this tiny video camera on her finger and went close to these altar pieces like this, and shot all the mouths and parts of the faces and realized they all look like, you know, that they are singing in one way or another. So, and this was an invitation for the opening, but what we actually did was a small, very small book, and which is close to an artist book, but small but complicated book. One copy was bound in leather and placed on a you know, like a musical score, music stand in the show. And actually, I participated myself in a performance where we used these books. I'll show you. Come back to that. You see the costume. The intention originally was that the CD should be recorded and be placed there, but we ran out of money and there was no CD. But the photos, there was 274 photographs, unsharp photos of these different mouths. And at the performance, we were, I think, 4 people who were dressed in these coats, and we were standing on a stage and we had a microphone, and we paged these books. Each of us had a so-called score, that book, and by paging it, we tried to resemble by breathing the way the mouths looked like. You know, sound out, and that was the sound performance. That was a complicated. It was a complicated project, as I said, but it was quite quickly done. But we printed it on Bible paper, very thin, 50-gram Bible paper, and it couldn't be done in Sweden at the time. So I eventually went to Cambridge University Press in England, because they had some special presses where they had been printing Bibles before, and they had some Japanese presses that they had added air to the thin paper when it moves in a big press. So it shouldn't be wrinkled when it gets out at one end full of ink. It was like air that had, to keep the papers down so they didn't wrinkle. No, sorry. This is the performance that Lauren knows, Joan Jonas, an American performance artist. She's also doing lots of drawings, lots of videos. As I had, while working with Anna Hamilton, I had come to know Joan Simon, who is an editor, a curator, and a writer. And she had started, or was about to start this project with Joan Simon. There were quite a number of catalogs done about Joan Jonas, but none of them was perfectly correct, and several of them are quite dull. And a New York publisher named Gregory R. Miller and Company small publisher, wanted to do it. We started 2007, and we finished the book 8 years later. It was, you won't see it, it's laying there, you won't see it when you, I mean, you won't think it when you pages that it's that difficult, but it was definitely the most complicated book I've ever, designed. At the very end, we couldn't find a cover photo that we could agree upon, neither 3 of us or 4 of us, including the publisher. So, Joan was about to have a performance in Milan in 2014 or 15. So I went there and managed to shoot this one, and everybody agreed that that could be used. She often, if anybody had seen her in a performance, she often draws, and she places her like a brush on a stick, and she dips it in ink, and she plays on things, and she also projects images from her videos in back of her while she's doing other things. And lately she also started to cooperate with Jason Moran, who's a jazz musician, piano player, and he was sitting here next to her on the stage. And as I said, she's done lots of videos, and it's not the greatest thing to reproduce a video in a book, in a still medium. And quite often, strangely, it's shown, you can see one image. So instead, I did a series of images to give an impression of what the cuts could be or the changes could be, and it worked quite effectively. And as I said, there are lots of do's and don'ts in bookmaking and in photo editing, and this is a definite no-no. Never replace a photograph like this with a gutter, the middle of the book, right over the face of somebody. But here I couldn't resist it, because this was a shot that Jonas herself shot in a performance in Amsterdam, I believe, where this guy is laying on a piece of glass and she's standing underneath him. And it's got quite powerful in the book. You saw one of these earlier. When I proposed to, I'm just about finished. When I proposed to Jan, what to show, I also sent a work that I showed 1989, and it's an installation with 4 or possibly 6 photographs and 5 words, and the words are cut in industrial rubber and gilded, and it's a fractures typeface style, which is often connected to you find it in all library Bibles and things in Sweden and many other countries, but you also find it in the use by the Nazis, for example. And when I did this, even though in '89, I put together some photographs with these words that are, cartoon words, onomatopoetic words, sound relating words, wham. Because I wanted to see how these fairly white photographs, black and white photographs, how they related to these words of a totally different nature. And in my mind, it had something to do, with feeling of a threat. And then discussing or sending things to Jan and Wojtek, I also realized, gosh, I mean, 1989, it's 30 years since the Czech Velvet Revolution. It would be interesting to show it here a second time. So that's what I'm doing. And you will see it tonight. This is one of the photos that you find there. Thank you. And if